So our next presentation here is on crop diversification, what works and what hasn't. Scott Chalmers with Manitoba Agriculture, we'll just get him set up here, is going to be talking to us here today. Scott grew up on a mixed beef and conventional tillage farm near Carroll, Manitoba in the 80s and 90s. He earned his honors degree in botany and chemistry from Brandon University in 2004, the year of no summer, while assisting at the same time while assisting plant pathology crew at the Brandon University Research Center for a couple summers. After graduation at BU, he managed the Southeast Research Farm in Redvers, Saskatchewan for 3 years, and then took a diversification technician position with Manitoba Agriculture in 2007, and that was until 2012. In 2012, he moved into the applied research specialist position, where he's worked since, managing the Western Agricultural Diversification Center in Melita, Manitoba. At Wado, Scott has his trusted team and have over 60 crops in a multitude of trials ranging from mainstream to novel crops. Please welcome Scott to the podium today.
Okay, thanks very much for the invite. And surprisingly, after working at a diversification center for 17 years, this may be one of my first diversification presentations. I usually, you maybe formally know that I work with a lot of intercrops, and that's what a lot of people see me as, is something to do with that. But no, thanks for having me out today. So today you will learn what has worked and what has not, and most importantly, why. So I kept that from you first. And I want to tell you a little story about growing up on the farm. As you know, it's quite boring. And one of the things to entertain me when I was growing up was I grew quite a large garden. And in doing so, you have to grow a lot of vegetables and whatnot. And I'd take them to town to Souris and sell them with my dad. And we would make like a couple of $100 every weekend, but it was in loonies and toonies. And so I would have all this change to spend. And my wife now makes fun of me for telling the story, but I would take this change to the city and spend it at the bar. And I would show up at the bar with a sack full of coins, and they would go over the bar and I'd pay for my drinks. And Tanis was like, "Who is that guy?" Anyway, long story short, we're married for a long time now. And she always thinks I'm silly. So, so anyway, moving on here. Before Wado was actually Souris Valley Irrigation Center, which started in 1993. And I was still in the garden at that time. But retired Minister Jim Downey had given the Souris Valley Irrigation Center $100,000 to do crop research. And this was more on the irrigation side because McCain's was thinking about setting up shop with potatoes. But they chose Carberry, so Melita was left with this diversification center, and we were supposed to figure out new things to grow because farming was not profitable at the time. So I think things just haven't changed all that much, actually. So we're located across the province here. I'm in the Southwest, and so today you'll actually see something beyond the 4 crops we've been talking about this whole conference. I'm in Melita. PCDF is in Roblin. We have Carberry with MCDC, sorry, and Prairies East in Arberg. So as you can see, we have a diverse range of growing conditions, and I put the crop heat unit map there just to show you kind of where those spots are. Generally, we're around the 2,500 mark for total crop heat units. I wanted to add this because I think we're heading into something that we're not too sure about. This is from the Climate Atlas here in Winnipeg, which where this site was developed, and you can click anywhere in the prairies to find out what your future of climate change might be. And I think this is compelling because, as you can see, I clicked on Hartney. That's as close as I could get to Melita. And by 2050, we're expecting to get almost 450 more crop heat units. And I think thinking about that, I looked at the precipitation model that you can also look at, and it just flat lines. So if you can imagine having that much more heat units with the same amount of precipitation, you can imagine where crops are going to start heading. So without my trusted teams, we all have our own teams at each center. I actually wouldn't be up here today. I would have nothing to talk about. They're the ones that do all the hard work, and kudos to them, because it seems more and more I'm getting stuck in the office, and they're outside all having fun. So um, thanks very much for your hard work. And everybody in this room as well has some sort of stake in the pie, I call it. And, I can say that the Diversification Center is in the center of this pie. We're surrounded by academia, public, and the industry. And we all try to have to work together to figure out these crops. And around those people are all kinds of teams, right? We have the universities, we have the governments, and commodity groups, for example. And I think if we all communicate and work together, we can figure things out pretty good. And we're all part of this value chain as well, where it all starts with some sort of unique idea, and it filters down the research continuum, basically basic research. Then we get to the applied. But most importantly, we have to do extension to transfer that to the end users who are adopting it on the field. And I think there's not only importance in having success stories, but also in those failure stories, because this is where we get our best feedback, is where the failures are. And my plan today is to tell you lots of success stories, lots of failures, but also some opportunities. So why is crop diversification so important? Well, it has to do with things like crop rotation. Obviously, we're not going to grow wheat and wheat and wheat, and nobody wants to do that. We all know there's things like pests that get in the way, and crops just grow better with rotation. There's the reduce of environmental risk, and this thing has to do with maybe rainfall, for example, heat and cool conditions, and we just have to buffer ourselves with that, and that kind of distills down to the economic risk, where basically the idea is, do not put all your eggs in one basket. And that means, the basket being like pests and the weather, and the eggs being a single crop. You want to grow a diverse amount of crops. And also with that is domestic self-sufficiency. We don't want to have to rely on other countries to supply our needs. If we can just do our own thing here, we'll be better off for ourselves. And I just put a pic there from Hawaii, because right in the middle there of the market, Hawaii is an island, of course, multiple islands, but they're 2,300 miles from any outside source of supply. And just think, you'd have to be quite self-sufficient to live in Hawaii. Then there's obviously the economic development, the GDP, the exports that come with having a diverse portfolio of crops to sell to the rest of the world. And one thing that really makes special crops or novel crops or any part of diversification work is that it has some sort of niche, something unique that no other commodity has but that one. I went too fast. By a show of hands, do you think we grow too many crops in Manitoba? John heard. I agree, and too many nitrogen recommendations to make for all those crops. And believe it or not, we do get asked on many things like that too. So yeah, moving on to my next slide, I asked my colleagues a couple weeks ago, how many crops have you guys grown? List them out, and we'll see what the list comes out to. So just at the diversification centers, this list totals 145 crops. Now, not all of them are winners, and not all of them are losers. We do have a few losers, and I'm going to tell you about some of them tonight or today. And there's also opportunities here. So this ranges from cereals to pseudo cereals. I had to look that one up. Grasses, legumes, pulses, oil seeds, fiber crops, root crops, vegetables, berry crops, herbs, and even these special crops. I had no clue on where to put them in the categories, but we have grown them. And so I did a kind of an inventory of Manitoba in general, looking at statistics from MASC. We have 11 crops in the top 97% of the acres that are exclusive to those 11 crops. The last three crops, or the last 3%, is all those other hundreds, or not hundreds, but over 100 crops that I've shown you in that list before. So I just thought that was compelling, and this is over those 11 crops being 11 million acres. In the remaining 3%, we have 345,000 acres in the province. But this is the majority of all those crops I had shown you. So if you can imagine the dominance of those first 11 crops compared to the rest. So just to give you a perspective, this is just the whatever could fit in the pie, but we still have a few crops, obviously, that maybe be in the hundreds of acres that I could not put on there. It just didn't fit, or they just don't, report them with the seeded acreage report. So most of these crops that you have seen in the pies have some sort of commodity support advantage. And this has to do with the commodity group taking a levy, or what I call an investment, and putting it back into the crop to develop things to support that crop. So sometimes those dollars are leveraged with public dollars or private dollars as well. So we're looking at market development, agronomy, knowledge and extension, networking with people, policy changes, and funding the research to improve those crops. And just as you can imagine, the majority of the crops we grew at the Diversification Center do not have a commodity support. So that's probably why you don't see them, mainstream. But also, we really do need commodity support for things like wheat, barley, soybean, corn, because those are the crops that are stable and are more dependable and pay the bills. Where the fringe crops generally are more risky, and they have a lot more greater challenges. So this is my list. I just kind of came up with it and decided in precedence, I think, I would say from 1 to 14, what are the greatest challenges in crop diversification? And the first being, is it adapted to Manitoba? The second being international commodity competition. So if somebody else in the world is growing it, you're in competition with them. So that's already at a disadvantage. Does it have any unique or niche or unique market that you could take it a little further? That is really what's going to keep it alive. The economics, obviously, is it going to pay the bills? Does it have a value-added aspect that goes above and beyond any other commodity? That's very important. And then we have, is there any regional processors or investment attraction for the province? And if you got something local that can work with the crop, that's huge. But if you got to ship it all the way to, I don't know where, it's going to cost you. So looking on to next, does it have the commodity support? We just looked at that. And this funds breeders, provincial specialists, agronomy groups, that sort of thing, which really helps the grower with their needs. Does it need special equipment? If you can look at the top there, we have a John Deere with some sort of new rig of a header to combine the seed heads of hemp, and then some sort of reaper system underneath to get the fiber. That would cost a lot of money and a lot of changes to your operation. So that can be a real kick in the butt. Skilled labor, that's another problem. Growing these crops takes skill. Do they have support services? For example, is there mechanics in town that can fix that combine header? That's a big issue. Or do you need special equipment or parts or things like that? Is the commodity, can lenders lend you money for it? Do they have enough knowledge about the crop to actually lend you the money? That's a big deal. Is the product seasonal? Is it storable? Do you need refrigeration? Does it need irrigation? doesn't need a certain kind of soil type like sand, like with potatoes, without stones. Pests, obviously, bugs are always bugging us. And, we're looking into pesticides, a lot of talk with that, but is it actually registered for some of these weird crops? There's lots of litigations there. And then, of course, transport to market. Is it local or is it far, far away? Now, looking kind of into the past of diversification, I would say, at least in the West, we've seen a resurgence of soybean um, in the mid 2000s there, and that was because of earliness of varieties and the herbicide tolerance, which became very popular. And farmers just loved cleaning up their fields, having pristine crops. And we were in a wet cycle at that time, so things looked great. All of a sudden, the tap turned off on the rain, and a lot of farmers kind of got shy of doing soybean because it just was reducing yield. But now we kind of got another resurgence because we got some Roundup tolerant kochia in the area. And so now we're growing extend beans, that sort of thing, to keep those acres clean. But as we saw in our previous presentations, that might quickly change. Corn is following the same suit. It's been gaining acres since the 90s and yield. And I think that kind of shows, this climate change that we're undergoing. Breeders are breeding for earliness and maturity, but also just we're getting more heat units now, and the corn crop is getting better and better and better. So what do you think we can do to diversify corn? Well, I think we have to look between the rows, and this is not weeds. And if you alluded to my poster presentation before, this is hairy vetch. So why don't we grow something? If something needs to grow in the middle of the corn, why don't we grow something that's useful? So in this situation, this farmer near Pearson had a one-pass seed master system, which he used a special singulating corn roller, and he was able to seed his vetch and corn all in one pass, fertilizer and everything. And then this is what he did with it. He has bison, and he grazed the crop. This is quite common in the West to get use of the crop. And he claims by having the vetch in that corn, he saved 40 cents per pound per cow per day. And if you're in the cattle business, that's a significant savings on feed. And the animals look pretty happy there. So moving on to more recent success stories, we're talking about hemp here, and we have the godfather of hemp here standing on the truck. This is Keith Watson. He was in our former positions here as a diversification specialist then. And looking at this crop, we can, yield about 1,000 pounds an acre, much more in fiber, but we really don't have many fiber markets, at least in Manitoba, on the go. But I know a company right now that's developing hybrid hemp, which could be 2 to 3 times the yield of what we're getting with conventional hemp. And I can't imagine what that's like, and I can't wait to test it. And I know James there is looking forward to it too. But adding to that, so we got grain that's used for oil and protein. Below ground or below the seed head here, we're looking at the fiber, and there's yet more multiple uses, which kind of boosts its value. So we're looking at things like the herd, which is used in cement to reinforce the cement and add R value, but also the fiber, which can be used in composites, like making doors for vehicles, for example. And right now, the United States is basically taking it by the horns to make it a biofuel. And maybe this hybrid hemp is kind of, something that might be useful for that as well. Another success story is peas. In 2022, we had a 54 bushel to the acre yield in Manitoba. It's used for multi-purpose food or feed uses. The proteins being fractionated by roquette. And by having roquette there, at least you have an end market too. But, we're starting to lose a bit of footing maybe with root diseases. It still lodges a little bit, and you really need long rotations out because of the root rots. And we don't really have a great plan for Aphanomyces yet. But I'm willing to try some of those NDSU tricks for sure. And with the onset of herbicide resistance, it's just getting harder and harder to grow peas. Quinoa, we've been growing this for several years now, the DCs. We're looking at about 1,000 pounds to 1,800 pounds an acre. It's gluten-free, which is kind of its niche. It's drought tolerant. I swear to God, I've grown quinoa on 2 millimeters of rain just to get it out of the ground. And none of the other crops or weeds want to jump out of the ground at that point. And it has a local market here in Portage la Prairie with prairie quinoa. Now, some of the downfalls we've had is that it's got few weed control options and a plethora of bugs that love to eat it. Potatoes, of course, we've had great success in Manitoba. Few processors here to deal with the crop and get it out the door. And you know, things really changed in the 2000s when everybody started working hard, full time basically, and we needed quick foods to eat at home. So a lot of processed foods. That's really give potatoes that boost in Manitoba. And you know, we have KPPA, which fixes the price, so nobody gets ripped off. And we have MCDC doing some crop research among other private entities. And what I think is cool is this cover crop work going on with mustard. Now we have a few concerns, which is soil health, verticillium wilt, storage rot, and Colorado potato beetles. I think we can fix 2 of those with doing biofumigation, which is currently going right now, using mustard. So what they do is grow a full crop of blooming mustard and then plow it under to biofumigate, which means the isothiocyanates, the spiciness of mustard, is converted into cyanide and it gases all the bugs in the soil. And you don't have to deal with diseases like verticillium wilt because of this process. And it's kind of fixing soil health because we have something growing there that we're incorporating, that sort of thing. We're not having to rely so much more on pesticides. Let's move on to some failures. I really like failures because I don't have to deal with them anymore. Now, if you can believe it or not, back in 2012, we grew some rice in Melita. And don't ask me how the seed got to Melita. I cannot tell you that because I don't know, but it came from North Korea. Mentioning that, so we grew this, we put it in the ground. I think it was the end of May, and it took 2 weeks before it even decided to come out of the ground. That's way too long. You want to see crops come up within 3 days, hopefully, or at least germinate. And so we kind of dismissed this crop. It's not going to work, but people are still chugging away at it. Galaxy Egg Ventures in Alberta is had grown it this year, but they used plastic film to create sort of a miniature greenhouse that deteriorates over time and decomposes. And that's their picture there. But in 2019, Ontario grew 156 bushel a acre of fully grown rice under the University of Guelph, I believe. Guar beans, another failure. If you've ever heard of guar beans, I've never heard of guar beans until we grew it. That big picture there at the top is as big as it got. And that's not saying much. It yielded 0, obviously. It just died from seed rot, and it took 2 weeks to come up. And I think it's just too cold to grow in Manitoba, just like the rice. And the reason why we're looking at it is because we're close to the oil industry, and they were using it to send it down the hole to frack open the geological formation so that the oil could flow better, and they pay a pretty penny for it. But it's also found in ice cream, so that's kind of interesting. Another failure we tried long ago was Niger seed. Now it yields a dismal 200 to 700 pounds to the acre. Now, if you can imagine competing against other commodities, you can just do the math pretty quick. But people do use this, and they feed it to the finches mostly, but it can also be used in food as well, like ciabatta bread. one of those bags of seed, I think it runs about $5 a pound or something like that to buy it from the retailer. But you know, it's a lot of work. You have to set the sieves right. And just at the time of harvest, when you think you're going to harvest, the birds come. Imagine that. And they just clean you right out. And you end up, you know, with pretty low yield. So I don't know what you can do about that. And there's virtually no herbicides registered. So you'd be breaking the laws there. Calendula, this was another wild goose chase. Basically, we had a company from Netherlands come, and they wanted to move to Manitoba because our land is so cheap, and they had this idea, and why not use it on cheap land, see what happens. So we grew a few plots, and I think Tammy remembers this, don't you? What a nightmare! And so the idea is grow this seed, which looks like mealworms. Then it has 20% oil content. And they wanted this specific oil called calindic acid, which they transesterify. I just made a word up to become this lacquer that you can paint on furniture, and it makes it hard, you know, a softwood to be a hardwood. And that was a great idea because it was going to replace the notoriously toxic tung oil. But I remember Tammy took it to some cold press, and tried to get some of the oil out. And they almost broke that press trying to do this. And anyway, we didn't really hear much about it after that. The company kind of gave up. But it's still used in the pharmaceutical industry and cosmetics. An opportunity, I think, is camelina, and that more specifically is fall-seeded camelina. We tried this last year with success, and as you can see in the background, we have winter wheat growing among kochia, just a terrible sight in salinity, but this stuff really put up with a lot of salinity. It's drought tolerant, and it gave us a yield, and the weeds didn't get through, so that's a great win. But it does get a few diseases too. Moving on to flax, this is fiber flax. We grew a few years ago. We can compete with cotton yields. They rip it right out of the ground with this machine, it puts it on its side, and then you need a few rainfalls, and then the next machine comes and flips it again after the next rainfall. The idea is to try and expand the North American market, which we have zero linseed market, but we can do this. And moving in closer to the winter here, the ground starts to freeze, and then this crazy baler has these metal spikes, and they can hit the rocks and snow. This could be an issue, but it does work. They need all the heads to be in the same row. Hops, this is probably one of my favorites. Am I getting close for time? Okay. Hops is a really cool one here, and I think it could be an opportunity. Unfortunately, this hop yard, which was south of Boissevain, had to close its business, not because of the hop business, but for personal reasons. But they could reach about 1,000 pounds an acre at $20 a pound, and it's very labor intensive. So that's just the kicker, and the bugs love it. So you're out there spraying. Teff, I encourage you to go and visit James's poster. It has many benefits, and I think has great potential as a gluten-free alternative and a dual, maybe a double harvest for hay. Lupins, this is something I worked with Dennis this summer. We can grow the same amount of protein per acre as peas. We just yield less in bulk, but in comparison on the protein side, it's the same. It's got some perks of Aphanomyces resistance. Blister beetles come, but we can take care of them. It has a stubble as compared to pea, so that's a perk too. Buckwheat, this was a project, a nutraceutical, and this I think is my second last one. Buckwheat, we were looking for rutin, and rutin is a anti-inflammatory chemical that you can consume and feel better. And we can get about 4.5 kgs per hectare, not acre. And we could not get this dry. It was just too succulent. And for anyone that can figure out how to get the leaves into a processing facility in a fresh state, that's the person that wins on this one. But you can be very lucrative. Regenerative ag, just broadly stating that diversity is one of its pillars, and I think it's very important because it can come with many perks, ecological goods and services that we're not tapping into. And PCF is actually working with some livestock right now on some projects, and intercropping works with that too, creating diversity in a spatial area. And I think there's a lot there to learn. And I want to mention just briefly, MBFI has a ton of cool stuff looking at this with, covers growing between corn or polycrops that really do have a fit using the shoulder seasons.